In this series, I'm following in the footsteps of 3 men who set out across the globe in search of lost treasures. The discoveries they made rewrote history. I'm standing in the presence of the birth of Viking art, revealing the untold story of how human societies began. What was going to come out of the ground here was going to rewrite the book of Western civilization. But these finds are not always what they seem, because the men behind them were products of their eras, driven by nationalism, colonialism, and ego, competing to stamp their mark on our shared past. This time, I'm unravelling the story of a rebel archaeologist who, in 1961, made a discovery that should be as famous as Pompeii. In central Turkey, James Mellott cracked the mystery of when humanity made its first leap out of the Stone Age into the urban living we know today. What he found was the world's oldest city, from the very dawn of civilization.
Literally at the time, nobody had seen anything like this before. It just didn't exist.
This discovery is still transforming what we know about our earliest history. I can imagine the face of someone else 9,000 years ago, gazing back out at me. Yet his own reputation lies in tatters.
Both the media and government had begun to ask some very hard questions.
Mellott became engulfed in scandal, accused of forging evidence and stealing from his own sites. Now, I want to separate truth from slander to reveal one of archaeology's greatest untold stories. This is the Konya Plain in central Turkey, known since ancient times as Anatolia. It's a 9-hour drive southeast from Istanbul, and the border with Syria is just another 6 hours away. It's a vast, flat, remote land. James Mellott, known to everyone as Jimmy, arrived here in 1951 when he was 26. Coming from the rationing misery of post-war Britain, he found himself in a fertile place where people farmed as their ancestors had done for countless generations. He'd been drawn here by mysterious features in the landscape. Every few miles, there are these peculiar-looking low mounds. They're everywhere. They're not natural. They're all man-made. The remains of long-lost settlements, some of them thousands of years old. In the 1950s, the Konya Plain was regarded as an archaeological desert. But Jimmy was convinced that these mounds held the secret of how civilization began. Jimmy taught himself Turkish and recruited local people to help. He stayed in guest houses where the beds were still warm from the previous occupants. And he went from village to village by bus before setting out on foot to search for evidence. But not everyone was accustomed to foreigners. Jimmy had to carry small rocks in his pockets, which he'd throw to scare away wild dogs. And he was arrested 3 times by the local police, who were suspicious of an outsider that was literally digging in their backyard. But coming from London, Jimmy loved the space and freedom. Then, at a place called Çatalhöyük, he finally found what he was looking for, a particularly large mound. All Jimmy's instincts as an archaeologist were kicking in. Was this the ancient settlement he'd been searching for? He wrote in his journal, "The importance of the Konya Plain in Anatolian prehistory is obvious. No other region on the plateau shows such numbers of ancient mounds or so many mounds of great size." Unfortunately, before Jimmy could even begin to dig, he succumbed to a particularly nasty stomach bug. He had to quit and make his way to the nearest village in search of urgent medical help. Jimmy's big discovery would have to wait. But when he did return, he'd reveal how humanity took the very first steps towards civilization. In Turkey, Jimmy lived in the city of Istanbul, known as the crossroads of East and West. It was his home for 20 years, and his son Alan still lives here. Hello,
Hi,
Alan.
welcome,
Lovely to
welcome.
see you.
Come on in, come on in. I'll
Thank you.
lead the way.
Thanks very much.
Well, this is the picture of my father as a young student, I think at London University, with the lovely period glasses.
Snappy dresser.
Snappy, yeah. He was probably a snappy dresser when he was young, but later on, dress was not important whatsoever.
How would you describe him? What sort of a man was he?
Dedicated to archaeology. I think clearly archaeology was his major passion. I admire my mother for having put up with him for all those years. If she hadn't been an archaeologist, I don't think the marriage would have survived.
No.
Luckily, she was a very good partner in that sense.
Arlette came from an upper-class Turkish family. Jimmy met her on a dig, and they married in 1954. She was his right-hand woman, working alongside him on every excavation. I'm intrigued by your mother. Wasn't she the one operating the camera?
Absolutely. She was the official cameraman, and this is, you know, her camera.
For the Mellarts, discovery was a family business. Even young Alan was drafted in to help.
Most of the photographs of me, like this lovely photograph of me cleaning skeletons.
How old are you in this?
I'm 7, 8, 9, 10, exactly.
What sort of 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old gets that sort of an opportunity?
I mean, I was basically born, and they took me straight to the dig.
I mean, it was obviously deep inside him, a deep-seated passion, right from his childhood, right from his education. Is that coming from his parents?
Yeah, I definitely think that my grandfather, who was an expert on Dutch drawings and Dutch paintings, very much encouraged him.
Jimmy spent his early childhood in London, in the heart of the art world. But after the Wall Street crash of 1929, his Dutch art dealer father, Jacob, moved the family to Holland, to the distress of his mother, Lynn.
I understand my grandmother, you know, was very unhappy with that, and she committed suicide. So that was a very traumatic period. He was about 8 years old. They came home from school and could smell gas in the kitchen, and the neighbors had to break down the door, and it was too late to save her.
Lynn's death left a huge hole.
He needed to find something to occupy himself, and history and archaeology were all subjects that filled in the time. Plus, then the war started in 1939, so, you know.
Jimmy was 14 when Holland was invaded. He was known to be a British subject, and 4 years later, he was ordered to labour service in Germany. But within hours, his father pulled strings and had him on a train to the small Dutch city of Leiden, where a job in a museum, equipped with a hideout room, kept him safe from the Nazis. At 21, Jimmy left Holland for good, winning a place at London University to study Egyptology.
For Jimmy, experiencing the trauma of his mother's suicide and then witnessing the Nazi occupation of Holland, these things must have taken a huge emotional toll on him. I can't help but think that for Jimmy, archaeology wasn't simply a career, it was a means of escape.
At university, Jimmy's passion for prehistory grew, and he landed himself a plum graduate job at the British Institute of Archaeology in Turkey. Arriving in 1951, he found a nation in the midst of rapid change. Turkey's Ottoman Empire had been an enemy of the West. Now it was building a new identity. Jimmy was already rejecting the idea that Greece and Egypt were the only ancient cultures that mattered. He believed Turkey had been badly neglected and saw a chance to make his name.
But there were risks. Forging of artefacts was commonplace in the archaeological world. In the Ottoman era, treasures of great national significance were simply spirited out of the country. They ended up in foreign museums and private collections. This meant that archaeologists from outside of Turkey were viewed with suspicion and jealousy. It was against this hostile backdrop that Jimmy set to work.
Very quickly, his sheer determination got results. This museum is packed with his discoveries. Within just 3 years of arriving in the country, in 1954, Jimmy uncovered a previously unknown 5,000-year-old Bronze Age culture in Western Turkey, proving that this country had powerful civilizations at the same time as the ancient Egyptians. By 1957, Jimmy had another excavation on the go. The finds he uncovered here proved the existence of an even older culture. They are beautiful and sophisticated. I find it incredible to think that they're over 7,000 years old. That's older than Stonehenge, than the Great Pyramids of Egypt. It wasn't just about the dates. Jimmy's finds challenged one of the biggest ideas in archaeology. When he started digging, one of the core principles of archaeology was that all the world's civilizations sprung from just one place in the Middle East, known as the Fertile Crescent. This was called cradle of civilization theory. The idea was that in the late Stone Age, around 12,000 years ago, our ancestors switched from hunter-gathering to farming and built permanent settlements. This was the single most important shift in our history, the beginning of human civilization. But Jimmy's finds in central Turkey were over 1,000 miles away from the Fertile Crescent. Jimmy was suggesting there was more than one cradle of civilization. A direct assault on conventional thinking.
For such a young man to challenge one of the core ideas of archaeology was as risky as it was radical. But for Jimmy, that was the sheer thrill of his chosen career, challenging accepted theories. And if he was lucky, finding the evidence to prove them wrong.
Which is what brought him back to the mysterious mound at Çatalhöyük in 1958. He wanted more evidence that Turkey had once been the home of advanced early cultures, and he had a feeling this was the place to find it. Professor Emma Beisel has been studying the career of Jimmy Mellart.
Jimmy would have seen other mounds. Why did he get excited about this one in particular?
So the different thing about this place is that from the artefacts that he could see on the surface, the material at the top of the mound, which is the latest, and the material at the bottom, which is the oldest, were all of the Stone Age. They're all Neolithic.
Oh, so it's almost like a time capsule. Rather than being built over later, he's aware that this is self-contained.
It appeared this site was entirely untouched.
I mean, that must have been huge for him as an archaeologist.
He was so excited about it. It was absolutely revolutionary.
What's more, the size of the mound indicated it had been built on a huge scale.
Jimmy knew he had to dig here. The realisation that under his feet might lie a Stone Age city must be one of the most exciting moments of his life. Because if he was proved right, this was a game changer. He wrote, it could mean only one thing. There were many houses. I realised that Çatalhöyük was all one huge Neolithic city. Was this the place where Jimmy could prove the cradle of civilization theory to be wrong?
It would take nearly 3 years for Jimmy to secure the necessary funding, build his team, and finally get digging. Çatalhöyük's 8,000 years of slumber came to an end on May 17th, 1961, when our party began excavations, and it was clear that this was no ordinary site.
Goodness, look at this site. It's magnificent, absolutely huge, but also so clearly a city, isn't it? You can see the buildings. What would it have looked like when Jimmy Mellart first arrived?
When he first started exploring, one of the things he noticed was that right here up on the slope, there were bits of walls sticking out of the dirt because the wind had blown across the top of the mound and taken the dust away, and the walls were there. So he knew right from then that there was buildings of some kind underneath there.
That's incredible. So nature was sort of yielding up the site.
Yeah, it was almost revealing the secrets slowly.
Jimmy was a new breed of Western archaeologist, as well as a revolutionary thinker. He built a reputation for treating the Turkish diggers on his team with the utmost of respect.
He always gave them acknowledgement, including in all his publications. He named them all.
And that's rare, isn't it?
Extremely rare, even today. Yeah. This was a small team. They knew each other well, and they worked fast together.
Mm. And when we're saying fast, do we have any sense of how fast he dug?
Yes, so we have Jimmy's diary from the excavation, which he kept meticulously all the way through. We're lucky that he did that.
This is the actual diary. This is the diary that Jimmy was keeping here on site as he was digging.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
You can see how fast things progressed from day to day. Here, on the 4th day of the excavation, he's already drawn an entire house and wall paintings.
Oh my goodness, 4 days in and you've got the entire footprint of the house and details. That's incredible.
Untouched for millennia, the clay silt soil had preserved the houses and their contents. Jimmy could never have anticipated such luck. He dug at a speed unimaginable today, and the finds just kept coming.
And what were the major discoveries then of that first excavation?
By the end of the first excavation, they could see plans of whole houses and areas of the settlement and what was inside the houses, so ovens and hearths and wall paintings, which was a totally new thing that nobody had expected. This incredible level of detail and craftsmanship.
Absolutely astonishing. You know, these ideas are all to challenging our notion of our Stone Age ancestors, aren't they?
And what he finds in the end is that it's really something like a city where there are lots and lots of people living in the same place together in very close quarters with quite a complicated society, far more complicated than anybody had imagined.
Yeah, this is blowing my mind.
You can still see the shapes of fireplaces and the outlines of rooms. Houses designed for the people who lived here many millennia ago. By the end of that first season, in 1961, Jimmy's Turkish and British team had unearthed the remains of 40 homes and the belongings of the people who lived in them. And of course, this was just one section of the 34-acre site.
When Jimmy was trying to work out quite how many dwellings were crammed together here, he began to realise that he was looking at a community of possibly thousands of people. But all the houses are right next to each other. There's no spaces in between. This was a city without streets. How does such a place even function?
Jimmy came up with some startling conclusions. The population built houses for small groups to live in, just like us. There were no bigger buildings, just houses, but they had no doors. Jimmy finally figured out people got into their homes through an opening in the roof. He found evidence of ovens below, the smoke escaping through the same hole. He wrote in his journal, "Rising in terraces, there were no streets or passages, but houses were built against each other like cells in a honeycomb." He was suggesting something never seen before, that in Çatalhöyük, people used each other's roofs rather than streets to get around. But one of the most remarkable discoveries was what he found underneath the houses. When he dug down below floor level, Jimmy started to find human remains. Dr. Nurcan Yalman from the Nişantaşı University in Istanbul worked here as an archaeologist in the 1990s.
This is a typical house. When we empty the traces of these cuts marks, we are finding the skeletons.
Right, so I'm getting a sense of this now. So this is it, this is where the skeletons are underneath the floors of the houses.
So you can see here some of the pictures.
That looks a crazy jumble of bones. Is it completely chaotic, these burials?
Some of them are like that. There are some burials that they just buried and left it like a whole body. And sometimes we're finding headless bodies, and sometimes we're finding only heads.
In all, Jimmy excavated 480 skeletons, ranging from newborn babies to people in their 60s. The inhabitants of Çatalhöyük seemed to be deliberately burying their dead beneath their houses.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So I find this strange.
Yeah, well, funeral is not one-time thing for Neolithic people of Çatalhöyük. And this is actually a kind of relief psychologically as well. They're kind of domesticating the fear of death.
It might seem unsettling to us, but for the people who lived in these houses, it seems to have been comforting to have the generations that had gone before them buried close by. Early reports of what Jimmy was finding sent shockwaves through the world of archaeology. But then came the date. Radiocarbon dating revealed it was 9,500 years old. Jimmy had found what he would call the world's oldest city.
Let's just stop for a moment and take a trip back through time to get a sense of quite how old this place is. If you rewind to when the ancient Egyptian pyramids were being built, you have to go back through 4,500 years of human history. That's 2 world wars, the Victorian era, the Elizabethans, Vikings, ancient Rome and Greece. To get back to the time when this place was flourishing, you had to go back the same amount of time again. Further, actually, another 5,000 years back. I mean, that is just mind-boggling.
Thanks to the excellent preservation here, we can get a glimpse of what life was like for the world's first city dwellers. Çatalhöyük was surprisingly sophisticated. A child buried with care, delicate bracelets on both wrists. Jewellery carefully crafted from bone, shells and stones. Human figures carved with such rich variety. While daggers and complex tools made of the rare volcanic glass obsidian were powerful evidence for long-distance trade.
For me, so much of the thrill of archaeology is world-building, sort of imagining my way back in the past. Objects like this really help me to do that. It's a rock of obsidian, and it's been shaped and chipped, then cut through, and the surface has been really highly polished so that it becomes a mirror. It's a wonderfully tactile object. Just touching it, I am putting my hand where someone from Çatalhöyük had theirs. As I look into its reflective surface, I can imagine the face of someone else 9,000 years ago, gazing back out at me.
In one short season, Jimmy's finds brought the beginnings of civilization to life. He'd come to Turkey to make his name, and he succeeded. But he'd also built the family life he lacked. Arlette and Alan were by his side at the dig, and when they weren't excavating, the Melarts lived an idyllic life in Arlette's inherited mansion on the banks of Istanbul's Bosphorus. Jimmy was riding high, and he wanted to tell the world about his discoveries. He chose the popular Illustrated London News, making the best use of Arlette's colour photographs and his own gift for storytelling.
Jimmy was claiming that what once lay here was the world's first city. A city of 8,000 people or more, all living together. Here was the evidence that advanced, civilised settlements were emerging outside of the Fertile Crescent. Jimmy had overturned the idea that there was just one cradle of civilisation.
It was clear that art had been incredibly important to the people of Çatalhöyük. Of all the finds Jimmy made, perhaps what most captured the public's imagination were the designs they put on the walls of their homes.
Oh my goodness. These are amazing. Beautiful colours still. So what's actually going on in these scenes?
So what you can see here, there's a really large deer in the middle of this picture. You can see the antlers, right? Yeah. And then around it, lots of little people in black and red surrounding it, they're much smaller, and the animal is huge, really out of proportion to the other things. They place huge importance on animals in this culture, so they're everywhere. They live with horns and skulls and all sorts of things in their houses every day. So animals are really present in daily life all of the time.
So these were on the walls of the houses?
Yeah, and it was a real surprise when they found these, because literally at the time nobody had seen anything like this before. It just didn't exist. So we have some letters that were written by somebody who was working on the excavation called Grace Huxtable, and she was so excited about it. She told her family everything about all the things that she was seeing.
Oh wow, look at this. So, golly, you would adore this life. Every blasted day, this magician Mella digs out more priceless relics. We are all stunned. It creates a strangely exalted and odd state of mind.
The pace at which things were happening, it all happened so fast. And she's actually a grandma at this time.
She's a grandmother. She writes like a 20-year-old or a 10-year-old.
Absolutely. The excitement of a child.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
The art of Çatalhöyük gave us an unexpected insight into how late Stone Age people saw their world and their place in it.
I just want to hammer home this point. These are the earliest paintings on man-made walls anywhere in the world. What's more, they're part of a collection of the most extraordinary artefacts ever discovered in a Stone Age site. The range of imagery is staggering. You have these oversized beasts, these acrobatic, dynamic figures, all popping with colour. Like the city itself, their discovery revolutionised our ideas of how and when human culture first developed.
Just as startling were the images of humans.
These were just so surprising to everybody that such detailed, high-quality, realistic things could be found at such an early date.
A variety of materials and styles here.
Lots of different things. So we have very realistic forms of men and women, ones with large heads, small heads, different shaped bodies, different poses as well.
10 millennia later, we'll never know the exact thought processes behind these figures, but they evoke human character and relationships with all the complexity we know today. Then Jimmy pulled out one particular object, larger and more intricate than any of the others. Some early 20th century archaeologists thought that Stone Age people believed in a single female deity, a Mother Earth or Great Mother Goddess. By the 50s, this theory had drifted into obscurity, but Jimmy saw it fitted the evidence here. His revival of the Mother Goddess idea would capture imaginations in a 1960s that was foregrounding feminism.
I think it's easy to see where Jimmy was coming from. These figurines are coming out of the ground in such high numbers. They're beautiful. They're often associated with grain, with food. When this object was found in the bottom of a basket of grain, this was held up as the archetypal Mother Goddess. You see this extraordinary female form. She's got these drooping breasts, these folds of skin, and the most enormous bottom. And she's perched on this throne that for armrests has big cats, possibly leopards or panthers. And the hands are resting, sort of subduing the beasts. She is in control. There's so many different things we could speculate about this object. It's 9,000 years old, after all. When it was discovered, it became the poster girl for Çatalhöyük. This
gave Jimmy the opportunity to say, look at the magnificent art that we're discovering, look at the world that we're building here, and watch this space. Jimmy had set the archaeological world on fire. Academics and colleagues were being forced to sit up and pay attention to him. He was now one of the world's most successful archaeologists. His and Arlette's home on the Bosphorus was becoming a place of pilgrimage, where Jimmy held court, regaling his guests with stories of his thrilling finds. Jimmy was now also well known to the media. He was to discover that the flip side of fame was notoriety.
Jimmy was about to become entangled in a plot with all the twists and turns of a detective novel. A plot that would reveal archaeology's dark underbelly.
It began when an English paper ran a feature in which Jimmy said he met a woman on a train in Turkey who invited him back to her place to see her fabulous treasures. The story would become infamous as the Dorak Affair, and it would mark the end of Jimmy's meteoric rise.
Hi, Krista.
The person who can best help me navigate my way through this murky tale is based here in Oxford.
So he was invited to stay in this family home for a week.
A week?
To make meticulous drawings of this collection of objects from Dorak.
Did he take photographs?
No, he apparently was not allowed to take photographs of these objects.
So his sketches are all that we have of this encounter?
Indeed.
Yet again, Jimmy chose the popular Illustrated London News to reveal the treasures he said he'd seen.
I'd like to take us through some of the images in this article. This image here really sets the historical context of Dorak.
It looks Egyptian?
It is indeed Egyptian.
Right.
If we look closely, we can see cartouches here and here of one pharaoh in particular, Sahure, an Old Kingdom pharaoh, one of the pyramid builders of ancient Egypt.
So this drawing, it's making a big, bold claim that there is a connection between this part of Turkey and the Egyptian,
Yes.
really kind of high point of Egyptian civilization.
Indeed.
So this is a absolute golden ticket.
Jimmy had built his career on finding cultures in Turkey as old and older than ancient Egypt. Now, these treasures appeared to prove a direct link. To the public, it was a sensation. But to his peers, the idea that Jimmy had seen evidence which had then disappeared without trace was puzzling. But the biggest problem was the Turkish authorities.
Both the media and government had begun to ask some very hard questions. Where are these objects?
It's a fair question.
Yes, because this is Turkish property. These are Turkish objects, right, in a sense. So they never found the house, no record of this woman either.
Oh, gosh. So that's starting to sound really suspicious.
Jimmy had been the golden boy of archaeology. Suddenly, his integrity was being called into question.
The most widespread accusation was that he was somehow involved with smuggling these objects out of the country. But there was another hypothesis that he simply made this story up.
And in either respect, this is career-ending stuff. To be either a fantasist or a smuggler,
Yes.
they're not great for an archaeologist, are they?
But Jimmy had another explanation.
He believed that he was set up in a sting operation on the train. Some powerful antiquities dealer would lure James Mellart to the private collection in Izmir, and he then would assess these objects and give them value.
Right.
They were then sold, and they simply vanished into the murky worlds of antiquities dealers around the world.
Yeah, they're in some stately home somewhere in a cabinet.
Indeed,
yeah.
right.
But why would Jimmy invent a story like this? What's certain is he'd built his life around being an archaeologist. So did he feel he had to discover more and more to keep his place in the sun? Or had he become so immersed in the lost world he'd unearthed that the theories he formed in his mind became confused with reality?
Until his death, Jimmy maintained he was the victim of a sting. And he was soon cleared by the Turkish police investigation of smuggling. It seemed like he'd weathered the storm, but then further disaster struck.
In 1963, while he was digging at Çatalhöyük, artifacts from his sites began to appear on the black market. A collector identified some of Jimmy's workmen as the likely culprits. Jimmy was devastated by the potential betrayal of trust. He was personally cleared of theft, but with the still unsolved Dorak affair hanging over him, the media would not let up. Jimmy Mellart was tainted goods.
How could anyone trust an archaeologist accused of smuggling treasure? Even though he'd been proved innocent, the Turkish government refused to renew his work permit. The site at Çatalhöyük was shut down. Jimmy was now in exile.
Still protesting his innocence, Jimmy was forced to take a temporary teaching job at London University. It was a terrible come down. He was an excavator who lived for the dig. Every year, he hoped to return to Çatalhöyük, but was disappointed. Then, personal disaster piled on top of his professional woes. In 1976, the family house in Istanbul caught fire. This had been the place where Jimmy enjoyed the fruits of his success. Now, it was a smouldering ruin. Çatalhöyük too lay in ruin, its walls and foundations slowly turning back to dust. Marooned in England, Jimmy continued to turn the site over in his mind. What else might the world's oldest city reveal? His answer came from left field.
Jimmy's theory was, what if Çatalhöyük and its culture never died?
If you've ever visited Turkey, you'll have browsed stalls selling the famous hand-woven rugs known as kilims, celebrated for their abstract designs and handed down through generations. Now, Jimmy announced he'd found a direct connection between the kilim rugs and his prehistoric site. Even more startling, he claimed the rug designs represented the Great Mother Goddess. Jimmy's home in England was halfway between Arsenal Stadium and Finsbury Park Tube. Excluded from Turkish archaeological sites and their home on the Bosphorus burnt to the ground, Jimmy and Arlette were now living full-time here in North London. It was all so different. to the glamorous life they'd left behind in Turkey. Şahine Farid worked at Çatalhöyük for more than a decade. She was also a close friend of Jimmy and Arlette.
Here we are.
Wow, what a treasure trove!
And this is where he would have done most of his research, his writing.
It is the study of someone with a very curious mind, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The flat belongs to Jimmy's son, Alan, who lives in Turkey, so it's barely been touched since Jimmy's day, a historical relic in itself.
This is where Arlette and Jimmy would meet and greet their guests.
Right.
This is where Jimmy would sit.
You can still see the imprint of their heads on the armchairs.
Absolutely, and you can see that the whole room is just full of their life in Turkey.
Now, Şahine, I am fascinated by Jimmy's goddess theory. Where is the evidence then?
In 1989, Jimmy went public with his radical mother goddess idea in a book packed with drawings and reconstructions.
If you look at some of these designs, you've got photographs of some of the artwork that was found in the field, side by side with kilim designs. So he starts with some of these geometric shapes, and then he extends it to his goddess theory and the iconography that he starts drawing.
But not everyone could see goddesses in these patterns.
Is that the problem? Is that the leap of faith?
Absolutely, that is the leap of faith. So here, if you look at one of the drawings, it could be a very stylised, splayed figure, and then with some imagination you can see the same symbol replicated in a kilim design, which he identified as mother goddess depictions as well.
But the biggest problem was that Jimmy had never mentioned or recorded these artworks during the dig.
So people felt that there was no proof that these paintings existed. And some of them were quite fantastic, that people couldn't actually relate the images that he was publishing to, at that stage, what we knew was coming out of Çatalhöyük.
Yeah, I find it, as an academic, problematic that you've got actual proven evidence in there, photographs, factual information of things we know exist. Then there are these drawings. Is he making it up?
You know, one thing that I can say about Jimmy is that he was a great archaeologist and he knew his history. And I think this is one of those instances where he was trying to fill in the gaps, but there was no evidence to back it up. And that was, as you say, that's what's problematic for academics.
Ancient sites like Çatalhöyük only give up so much evidence. Any archaeologist in Jimmy's shoes would have to use their imagination to fill in the gaps. But what Jimmy did went way, way beyond this.
This book, this goddess book, it is full of fabrications. James Mellart has literally made up evidence, and you cannot do that as an academic. But I also understand this is his world. He's filling it with his imagination, the things he thinks should be there.
Jimmy had only ever wanted to be an archaeologist. Yet, in his obsession with his great discovery, he had imploded his own career. Meanwhile, 2,500 miles away, Çatalhöyük lay abandoned, Jimmy's life's work unfinished. Then, just when it seemed that its remaining secrets would stay hidden forever...
Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm great. Yes, it's good to meet you. And
Professor Ian Hodder is based at Stanford University in California. As a student at University College London in the late 1960s, he was inspired by Jimmy's lectures.
he was an extraordinarily charismatic person. He would just stand at the front of the lecture hall without any notes and in the dark and looking at these slides and talking about them. And he was just so enthusiastic, it was infectious.
Jimmy's own career was floundering, but he mentored younger archaeologists like Ian, who went on to become an expert in the late Stone Age. In 1993, he applied to the Turkish authorities for a permit to excavate at Çatalhöyük.
And what were the conditions then that meant you were able to resume this dig?
Well, I think they felt that the site had been left in a mess. And there was terrible erosion going on there, and yet it had become, through Jimmy's work, a really internationally important site. So something needed to be done, and I think they felt that enough time had passed for the story to move on. The other part was whether Jimmy would support something like that. And I went to visit them in a flat, and I finally said, "Well, do you think it would be possible? Would you support me going back?" And Jimmy looked across at Arlette and said, "What do you think, my dear?" And she said, "I think it will be all right." And that was it.
Wow, so it hung on that phrase.
3 decades after Jimmy's original discoveries, one of the greatest ever concentrations of archaeological firepower was now aimed at Çatalhöyük, as a joint Turkish international team got to work. Nurcan Yalman was one of the team. During her time here, they unearthed new evidence that allowed them to examine one of Jimmy's key theories, that the world's oldest city was dominated by a powerful mother goddess. What they discovered surprised everyone.
James Mellard, he really liked this story because he found this famous mother goddess figurine. But actually, the new team also discovered different things ideologically because, first of all, men and women doesn't show any trace that they were treated differently in the society.
The team carried out modern scientific tests on the remains of the people who once lived here. They expected to find a difference between the lifestyles of men and women. But in fact, the male and female bones and teeth had all worn at roughly the same rate.
This is interesting then, because although there isn't necessarily a matriarchy, gender is not dividing society in the way that even it does today.
In general, they were working more or less in the same sort of tasks, you know. That's why we can say that egalitarian in terms of there was no chef, no priest class, but also women and men looks equal here, which is really sweet.
Absolutely amazing. I want to go back there. Yeah. It's amazing to think that 9,000 years ago they had better gender equality than we do today.
Yeah.
The evidence was consistent through the generations, so the team concluded that this egalitarian society lasted for hundreds, if not thousands, of years.
Çatalhöyük is remarkable in so many ways. People congregating together and producing what Mellart describes as the earliest surviving city. But what really strikes me is in relation to elites and power. There isn't what we think of in modern terms of a sort of social hierarchy. And even more extraordinary is this notion of gender equality. Perhaps this 9,000-year-old civilization actually had a better idea of how to live than we do today.
The site had come back to life, but Jimmy was still in exile. Then, in 1998, aged 73, he got a call from Ian Hodder, inviting him and Arlette to come back. They took their son, Alan, with them. This is his first visit since then.
Oh, Alan, how does it feel to be back here?
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
What did it feel like for them when they came back? Were they treated well?
Brilliantly. He was excited, he was, honoured. It was, I think, a big bag of, emotions. And I think it was a sort of a reconciliation in the end as well.
But until the end of his life, Jimmy never satisfactorily explained his fabricated mother goddess drawings, and the mysterious Doric affair remains unsolved. In terms of the controversies, Alan, what do you think was going on there?
Obviously, the Çatalhöyük site produced so many fascinating objects, wall paintings, obsidian tools, and many other items. So to be able, in the 1960s, to bring it to life, to give it a story that people would understand, it's obviously extremely difficult. To do that, you have to be creative and think and interpret. And whether you think it was far-fetched or not is another matter. But that's basically what archaeologists do, is trying to build a story around the artifacts they find. And the artifacts that my father found were absolutely outstanding.
Jimmy's achievements were remarkable. But, as Christoph Bakuba explained in Oxford, it's hard to reconcile them with his flaws.
James Millar's legacy is a complicated one. He is no doubt a brilliant archaeologist. There is really no better person for Çatalhöyük, right? He had all of the skills, all of the abilities, all of the insights. Now, there is this other James Millar. He created worlds based on empirical data and also based on what he thought the world should look like. And that is a very complicated legacy for archaeology and for archaeologists like myself who are working in the footsteps of James Millar's research.
When Jimmy first arrived in Turkey, no one believed there was an ancient culture to be found, but Jimmy always thought differently.
He was such an intuitive, instinctive archaeologist, and he really could feel his way back into the past.
The 9,500-year-old world he revealed was complex, egalitarian, artistic, and sophisticated beyond any imagining. Jimmy died on July 29, 2012, aged 86. He lived just long enough to see Çatalhöyük declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Jimmy proved the idea there was just one cradle of civilization was wrong, and began to tell the real story of how civilization was born.
Jimmy had discovered things that would transform our understanding of human history, and that is what he deserves to be remembered for.